They fired me for being obsolete after 20 years, now I own their biggest competitor. The executive boardroom's crisp, cool air seemed to hum with an unspoken tension, though for Silas, it was merely the predictable prelude to a long-anticipated finale. Sunlight, filtered through the high, arched windows, cast long, sterile shadows across the polished mahogany table, illuminating dust motes dancing in the silent space. The scent of expensive coffee and freshly cut flowers, usually a pleasant backdrop, now felt cloying, a false veneer over the impending corporate guillotine. Dax Thorne, a man whose ambition was as sharp as the crease in his tailored suit, stood before him, the very picture of youthful triumph. His bespoke suit, a charcoal gray, fit him with an almost predatory sleekness, and the slight, self-satisfied tilt of his head spoke volumes. Dax's words, delivered with a practiced gravitas that barely masked his self-satisfaction, were meant to be a crushing blow. "Silas," he began, his voice smooth, devoid of any genuine empathy, echoing slightly in the hushed room. "We've decided to go in a different direction. You're obsolete." Obsolete. The word hung in the sterile air, a pronouncement delivered with the finality of a death knell. It resonated with a hollow clang in Silas's mind, yet brought with it no sting. A lesser man, perhaps, would have recoiled, a flicker of indignation or despair crossing his features. Silas, however, merely met Dax's gaze, his own expression unwavering, a quiet stillness that surprised even Dax. He saw the briefest hint of confusion in Dax's eyes, a flicker of an expectation unfulfilled. Dax had anticipated a reaction, a moment of weakness he could relish, perhaps even a desperate plea. What he saw was a man perfectly at peace, a quiet current of amusement running beneath Silas's composed exterior. Dax had no idea, of course. No idea that his pronouncement, far from signaling Silas's end, was merely the first, clumsy step in a meticulously choreographed dance Silas had been rehearsing for years. His mind was not reeling from a sudden defeat, it was already 5 moves ahead, observing the board, anticipating the next play. This moment, this perceived victory for Dax, was merely the opening gambit. And Silas Vane, the true architect of Innovatech Solutions, held the unplayed cards, a winning hand concealed from view. For 2 decades, Innovatech Solutions had been more than a company to Silas, it was the very canvas upon which he painted his life's work. He had arrived there as a young, hungry systems architect, fresh out of university, armed with a fierce intellect that devoured complex problems and an almost obsessive dedication to building robust, resilient frameworks. The company, back then, was little more than a concept, a handful of brilliant minds huddled in a cramped, rented office above a noisy deli. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and boundless ambition. They dreamed of revolutionizing data management, but it was Silas who translated those dreams into tangible, operational reality. He designed the foundational architecture, the intricate web of servers, networks, and databases that allowed their nascent ideas to take flight. He built the nervous system of what would eventually become an industry titan, byte by painstaking byte. Silas's life became intrinsically entwined with the company's growth. Weekends bled into weekdays, nights into dawns, as he meticulously crafted, optimized, and secured every single system. The glow of his monitor often illuminated his face well past midnight, the only sound the quiet hum of servers and the gentle click of his keyboard. He sacrificed personal relationships that withered from neglect, neglected hobbies like his vintage camera collection and his passion for astrophysics, and often, his own well-being, all for the singular pursuit of perfection within Innovatech's digital veins. He saw the company grow from a scrappy startup, fueled by venture capital and late-night pizza, to a burgeoning enterprise with its own campus, then to a national leader, and finally, a global powerhouse with offices spanning continents. Every byte of data, every line of code, every secure transaction, bore his invisible signature. He knew every corner, every hidden passage, every potential vulnerability of their systems because he had either built it or meticulously studied it, often spending hours tracing the flow of data through obscure legacy protocols. His identity was not just intertwined with Innovatech's success, in many ways, it was Innovatech. The problems, or rather, the seeds of this inevitable confrontation began to sprout around 5 years prior with the arrival of Dax Thorne. Dax was the quintessential new guard, young, charismatic, articulate, and brimming with buzzwords like synergy, disruption, and paradigm shift. He arrived as a disruptor, a visionary hired to inject new energy and agile methodologies into what he, and seemingly the board, perceived as a complacent, if successful, institution. Dax had come from a fast-paced, albeit short-lived, startup that had crashed and burned, but not before he'd learned the art of spinning failure into valuable experience. From their very first interaction, Silas sensed a fundamental clash. Dax's eyes, bright with an almost evangelical fervor for the next big thing, glazed over when Silas spoke of foundational integrity or long-term resilience. Where Silas valued stability, redundancy, and meticulous planning, Dax championed speed, iteration, and a relentless pursuit of the next shiny technology, often at the expense of foundational integrity. He saw Silas's deliberate approach as slow, his insistence on thorough testing as unnecessary caution, and his deep institutional knowledge as an impediment to rapid change, a stubborn attachment to the past. Dax was a master of corporate politics, effortlessly charming the board with PowerPoint presentations that were more art than data, weaving narratives of innovation that glossed over the underlying complexities. He'd suggest sweeping changes, like migrating their entire customer relationship management (CRM) system to an untested, open-source platform, or integrating AI-driven analytics without proper data cleansing, often without fully grasping the delicate balance of the existing infrastructure Silas had painstakingly built. Silas, in turn, would calmly present the technical implications, the potential risks, the unforeseen cascading failures that could cripple operations. His logic was irrefutable, his data precise, but it lacked the emotional punch and grandiosity of Dax's rhetoric. Over time, Silas became the inconvenient truth-teller, the voice of caution that grated against Dax's boundless, often unexamined, optimism. Board meetings became battlegrounds of philosophy, where Silas's reasoned arguments were met with Dax's dismissive waves of the hand and appeals to the future. It was during one particularly heated discussion about migrating Innovatech's core financial systems to a new, untested cloud platform, a move Dax championed as revolutionary and cost-saving, that Silas truly understood the precariousness of his position. The proposed platform, while touted for its scalability, lacked the robust security protocols and geographical redundancy that Silas had baked into Innovatech's internal systems. He presented a detailed risk assessment, highlighting potential data breaches, latency issues, and the astronomical cost of recovery should the migration fail. Dax, however, dismissed Silas's concerns, labeling them as resistance to change, the stubbornness of a man clinging to outdated methods, even subtly implying Silas was protecting his own obsolescence. The board, influenced by Dax's persuasive charm and the siren call of reduced operational costs, voted overwhelmingly in favor of the migration. That day, as Silas walked away from the meeting, the board clearly swayed by Dax's persuasive charm rather than Silas's reasoned technical warnings, a cold clarity settled over him. They saw his depth as a limitation, his mastery as a relic. He realized then that his value, so fundamental to the company's very existence, was entirely misunderstood and increasingly undervalued by those at the top. The company, his life's work, was being handed over to a showman. It was a profound and unsettling realization, but it also spurred a quiet, strategic shift in his approach. If his value was no longer appreciated, if his counsel was dismissed, then he needed a way to unequivocally demonstrate it, to make it undeniable. He began to work on what he privately termed Project Guardian. This wasn't a malicious act, nor was it born of bitterness or a desire for revenge. It was an act of profound foresight, a contingency born from a deep, abiding loyalty to the company he had built. Silas had always believed in redundancy, in fail-safes, in having a backup plan for the most critical systems. Now, he simply expanded that philosophy to an unprecedented scale, creating a comprehensive, self-sustaining contingency architecture that mirrored, yet ran independently of, Innovatech's primary operational systems. He envisioned it as a digital ark, ready to weather any storm. This wasn't a simple backup. It was a fully functional, parallel universe of Innovatech's core operations, meticulously designed to be dormant yet instantly activatable, a ghost in the machine. It held an exact replica of all critical data, a shadow network, and the essential operational logic required to keep the company functioning at a fundamental level, even if the primary systems were compromised or, more pertinently, intentionally dismantled by short-sighted decision-makers like Dax. Silas built it in his spare time, late into the nights and through quiet weekends, using secure, untraceable channels and custom-built encryption algorithms that he alone understood. He wove it into the existing infrastructure in a way that was undetectable to anyone without his unique, encyclopedic knowledge of the system's deep architecture. He utilized obscure, unused ports, repurposed dormant server clusters, and leveraged his intimate understanding of the network's deepest protocols to camouflage Project Guardian's presence. It was his intellectual magnum opus, the ultimate failsafe, his quiet insurance policy not just for himself, but for the very future of Innovatech itself. It was his secret weapon, a testament to his unwavering commitment to the company, even as the company itself seemed intent on discarding him. The process was painstaking, a marathon of coding and configuration, each line of code a defiant whisper against the coming storm. The months following Dax's pronouncement of Silas's obsolescence were a period of serene, almost meditative activity for him. He cleared his office with a methodical calmness that unnerved some of his former colleagues, who watched with pity or awkward silence. The framed photos of Innovatech's early teams, the awards he had quietly contributed to, the dog-eared technical manuals, all packed away not with sadness, but with a sense of quiet anticipation. He felt a profound liberation from the constant need to fight for his principles. Dax, of course, interpreted Silas's composure as shock, perhaps even a grudging acceptance of his fate. He saw Silas's silence as capitulation, his lack of protest as the quiet fading of an old, irrelevant man. This misinterpretation was precisely what Silas had counted on. He even offered Silas a role as an external consultant to ensure a smooth transition, a move Dax saw as magnanimous, but Silas recognized as an unwitting gift. It gave him the perfect vantage point from which to observe the unfolding chaos. Dax wasted no time. Within weeks, the changes he had so vehemently advocated for began to materialize. He pushed through the new cloud migration with aggressive deadlines, slashed budgets for what he deemed redundant legacy systems, and restructured the entire IT department, bringing in his own people, young, eager, and largely inexperienced in the complex nuances of Innovatech's existing architecture. They were bright, yes, but lacked the foundational wisdom that comes only from years of intricate system management. He was dismantling, brick by painstaking brick, the very foundations Silas had spent 20 years building, all in the name of modernization and efficiency. The core engineering teams, loyal to Silas but powerless, watched with growing dismay as critical infrastructure was ripped out or hastily replaced. Silas watched from the sidelines, ostensibly helping with the transition, but in reality, observing the subtle tremors preceding the earthquake. His plan, Project Guardian, was already in motion, its gears silently turning. Before his official departure, during those last few weeks, he had subtly activated the first phase of his contingency. It was a series of almost imperceptible data integrity checks, micro-redundancies, and self-healing protocols embedded deep within the primary system, designed to subtly log and report on any inconsistencies or critical data shifts caused by Dax's new initiatives. These reports, of course, were routed only to Silas, encrypted and delivered to a secure, private server he maintained. He began to receive daily updates, a steady stream of data that confirmed his every fear. Dax's accelerated migration strategy was creating data integrity issues, his budget cuts were exposing critical vulnerabilities, and his new, inexperienced team was missing fundamental operational cues. The system wasn't collapsing outright, it was slowly, subtly, developing a fever. Performance metrics dipped by fractions of a percent, latency increased marginally, and minor, inexplicable glitches began to surface. These were not catastrophic failures, merely persistent irritants, like a pebble in a shoe, accumulating into a growing discomfort. Customer service complaints began to tick up, internal reports showed minor data discrepancies, and employee productivity dipped as systems occasionally lagged. Dax, in his boundless self-confidence, dismissed them. He attributed the minor hiccups to teething problems inherent in any large-scale transition, a necessary discomfort on the path to greatness. His team, eager to please and lacking the deep historical context, scrambled to apply quick fixes, patching symptoms rather than addressing the root causes. This cycle fueled his arrogance. He believed he was successfully navigating the turbulent waters of change, proving his superiority over Silas's outdated methods. He strutted through the offices, radiating an aura of triumph, basking in the glow of his supposed genius. He even granted a few interviews to industry publications, boasting about how he had streamlined Innovatech, making it lean, agile, and ready for the future, unburdened by the dead weight of legacy thinking. Each glowing article, each dismissive comment he made about the past, was a reaffirmation of his burgeoning ego and, ironically, a confirmation that Silas's timing was perfect. The stage was being set, not by Silas, but by Dax's own relentless pursuit of perceived glory. And Silas, the obsolete architect, merely continued to observe, gathering the increasingly alarming data, patiently waiting for the inevitable moment when the cracks would become too wide to ignore. The Zeigarnik effect was beginning to manifest for Innovatech, a growing list of unresolved issues lurking beneath the surface, waiting to demand attention, building psychological tension that would soon burst. The climax arrived, as Silas had always predicted it would, with the precision of a finely tuned clockwork mechanism. It was the annual Innovatech Solutions Global Strategy Summit, the company's flagship event, meant to showcase its triumphs and outline its vision for the future. The venue was the city's grandest convention center ballroom, adorned with Innovatech's sleek branding and pulsating with anticipation. Dax Thorne, of course, was the keynote speaker, poised to unveil the new Innovatech, the one he had painstakingly, and disastrously, reshaped. The grand ballroom was packed, a sea of investors, analysts, industry partners, and the entire senior leadership team, all buzzing with hushed conversations and the clinking of champagne flutes. The air was thick with anticipation, almost palpable. Dax began his presentation, a masterclass in corporate rhetoric, filled with impressive charts, animated graphics, and projections of unprecedented growth. His voice boomed with confidence, echoing through the vast space. He spoke of agility, disruption, and a future unburdened by the past, painting a vivid picture of a streamlined, hyper-efficient Innovatech. Then, precisely at the moment he transitioned to showcasing the new, hyper-efficient core operating system, displaying its real-time performance metrics on the massive LED screen behind him, it happened. A single, ominous flicker on the giant display screen behind him. It wasn't a crash, not yet. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the data presented, a sudden, jarring inconsistency in the real-time financial projections he was displaying. A few murmurs rippled through the front rows. A ripple of unease went through the room. Dax, visibly flustered, tried to ignore it, speaking louder, gesturing more wildly, attempting to overpower the anomaly with sheer charisma. But the flicker intensified, growing more frequent, followed by a series of cascading errors. The projected figures on the screen began to fluctuate wildly, jumping between absurdly high and dangerously low values, then froze, replaced by an alarming, stark red warning, data integrity compromise. System critical. A chilling silence descended upon the ballroom, then a collective gasp swept through the audience. Panic began to set in among the Innovatech executives on stage, their faces paling, their expressions shifting from confident smiles to abject horror. Dax, his face contorted in disbelief and rage, barked orders into his earpiece, his voice strained and desperate. His team, frantically tapping on their keyboards in the wings, could only confirm the growing catastrophe. The entire network, the very backbone of Innovatech, was, for all intents and purposes, offline. Not a total shutdown, but a total loss of confidence in the data. The kind of failure that could, and would, trigger a market panic, wiping billions from the company's valuation in minutes. It was then that Silas Vane, perfectly composed, walked calmly onto the stage. No dramatic entrance, no spotlight. Just a quiet, deliberate stroll past the bewildered security, who, despite recognizing him, were too stunned by the unfolding chaos to intervene. He had anticipated their confusion, their paralysis in the face of such a public meltdown. Dax's eyes, wide with disbelief and pure fury, locked onto Silas's. His jaw clenched, a vein throbbing in his temple. "Silas! What in God's name are you doing?" Dax hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of terror and impotent rage. Silas ignored him, turning instead to the hushed, stunned audience. His presence, radiating an almost unnerving calm, was a stark contrast to the panic around him. His voice, amplified by the microphone he had calmly taken from the lectern, was steady, betraying no emotion, yet filled with an undeniable authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his gaze sweeping across the worried faces, each one a testament to the magnitude of the crisis. "You are currently witnessing the true cost of obsolescence. What you see before you is not a random system failure. It is the inevitable consequence of dismantling the very foundations that made Innovatech a titan." He paused, allowing his words to sink in, the silence punctuated only by the frantic clicks of keyboards from Dax's team. Silas gestured to the frozen, error-ridden screen, a digital monument to Dax's folly. "For the past 6 months, since my departure, critical redundancies have been removed, essential legacy protocols overridden, and core data integrity safeguards I spent 2 decades meticulously building, have been bypassed in the name of speed and modernization. What you are seeing is the primary Innovatech system, unmoored from its stable foundation, crumbling under the weight of its own ambition." Dax lunged forward, fueled by a desperate, animalistic fury, but was held back by a security guard, who, despite his confusion, reacted to the aggression. "You did this!" Dax shrieked, his voice cracking, accusing, his finger trembling as he pointed at Silas. Silas merely smiled, a small, knowing upturn of his lips, a silent acknowledgement of Dax's predictable outburst. "No, Mr. Thorne," he replied, his voice chillingly calm, slicing through Dax's hysteria. "You did. But I, as the architect of Innovatech's original resilience, foresaw this very scenario. 20 years ago, I began building what I call Project Guardian. It is a completely independent, parallel operational system, a ghost in the machine, designed to serve as the ultimate failsafe should the primary system ever be compromised by misjudgment." He paused, letting the implication hang heavy in the air. The curiosity gap, now gaping wide, was about to be filled with an astonishing revelation. Project Guardian has been quietly mirroring every essential piece of data, every critical transaction, every operational function of Innovatech's primary system. It is untouched by Mr. Thorne's innovations. It is pristine, secure, and entirely functional, a digital twin running in the shadows, waiting for this very moment. Then, Silas turned to the technical crew, who were still staring at their defunct screens in despair, their faces etched with hopelessness. His gaze was firm, authoritative, cutting through their panic. "At my signal," he instructed, his voice clear and resonant, "initiate Protocol Alpha 7019er. You will see an immediate system stabilization. Innovatech's operations will resume, not on the compromised primary network, but on the parallel, secure architecture of Project Guardian. All historical data, all current transactions, will be preserved and accessible, as if this critical incident never occurred." A low murmur rippled through the room, then a collective intake of breath. The technical team, desperate for any solution, for any shred of hope, followed Silas's instructions without hesitation. Their fingers flew across their keyboards, executing the commands he had just given, commands that only a true master of the system could possibly know. Silas watched as the red error message on the giant screen flickered, then vanished. Within seconds, the chaotic, wild fluctuations ceased. The familiar Innovatech company logo reappeared, clean and vibrant, followed by live, accurate, and perfectly stable financial data. The roar of the audience was deafening. Gasps of shock gave way to murmurs of awe, then spontaneous, thunderous applause that shook the ballroom. Dax Thorne stood frozen on the stage, his face ash-white, utterly humiliated, his grand reveal having become Silas's grand reclamation. His empire of buzzwords had crumbled, replaced by the silent, undeniable power of true architecture. The aftermath was, as expected, swift and decisive. The immediate fallout in the grand ballroom was an electrifying mix of shock, relief, and profound embarrassment for Innovatech's leadership. Dax Thorne, shattered and humiliated, stood trembling on the stage as the applause for Silas swelled into a standing ovation. He tried to speak, to protest, but no words came, only a strangled croak. His carefully constructed image of the visionary disruptor had imploded in a spectacular public fashion, leaving him exposed and broken. Security eventually escorted him off the stage, not gently, his furious, betrayed glances at Silas doing nothing to salvage his dignity. He was a broken man, stripped bare of his false veneer. The board members, who had so eagerly backed Dax, now surrounded Silas, their faces a mixture of profound relief and abject shame. The chairman, a man who had often dismissed Silas's warnings as overly cautious, grasped his hand, his grip firm, his voice thick with emotion. "Silas," he began, his eyes reflecting a deep regret, we were blind. We underestimated your foresight, your dedication. We let you go for the wrong reasons, chasing an illusion." Other executives echoed his sentiments, their apologies flowing like a dam that had just burst. They had witnessed, firsthand, the catastrophic consequences of their short-sightedness and the undeniable proof of Silas's irreplaceable value. They now understood that true innovation was built on, not at the expense of, a solid foundation. In the days that followed, the story dominated the business news. Innovatech had narrowly averted a complete collapse, saved by the very man they had declared obsolete. Journalists scrambled to uncover the full story, painting Silas as a quiet genius and Dax as a reckless charlatan. The stock, which had plummeted during the brief but terrifying system failure, rebounded with ferocity once the news of Project Guardian, and Silas's role in it, broke. The market reacted not just to the recovery, but to the sheer resilience and foresight demonstrated by its true architect, signaling a renewed confidence in Innovatech's underlying strength. Dax Thorne was, predictably, dismissed within 24 hours. The official statement cited irreconcilable differences in strategic vision, a euphemism for his catastrophic failure and Silas's undeniable triumph. His carefully cultivated career, built on a foundation of aggressive ambition rather than deep understanding, lay in ruins. His carefully curated image of a disruptor had indeed disrupted, but in a way he had never intended. Whispers of other, less public failures in his past began to circulate, tarnishing his reputation irrevocably. The broader consequences for Innovatech were immediate and profound. There was a sweeping re-evaluation of personnel and priorities. Dax's hand-picked team, many of whom lacked the foundational knowledge to truly manage the complex systems, found themselves exposed and quickly replaced by seasoned engineers and technicians who understood the value of meticulousness. The board initiated a comprehensive audit of all recent strategic decisions, quietly undoing many of Dax's more reckless changes, prioritizing stability and long-term resilience over flashy, untested solutions. The company, having stared into the abyss, emerged with a renewed, and deeply humbled, appreciation for stability, meticulous planning, and foundational strength. They had learned a harsh, public lesson about the true cost of dismissing experience and wisdom in favor of superficial, untested innovation. As for Silas, there was no gloating, no vindictive satisfaction. His reaction to the unfolding consequences remained calm, measured. He understood the necessity of these events, the unavoidable nature of the lesson that had to be taught. He simply observed the fallout, knowing that justice, in its own methodical way, was being served. He felt a quiet sense of duty fulfilled, a testament to his unwavering loyalty to the digital edifice he had so painstakingly erected. The dust settled over Innovatech Solutions in the ensuing months, leaving behind a company profoundly transformed. Silas's position was not merely reinstated, it was elevated beyond anything he had previously held. He was appointed Chief Systems Strategist, a role created specifically to leverage his unique expertise, granting him the autonomy to oversee all foundational technology, ensuring that such a catastrophic near-miss would never recur. His compensation package reflected his undeniable value, and his influence within the company was absolute, built now on a bedrock of proven competence rather than a quiet understanding. He was no longer merely the architect, he was the guardian, the silent sentinel safeguarding Innovatech's future. Innovatech, having learned its painful lesson, began to thrive once more, its growth now built on a foundation of both innovation and deep, resilient infrastructure. The Dax Thorne era became a cautionary tale whispered in the corporate corridors, a stark reminder of the dangers of hubris and superficiality. Dax himself, Silas Vane, attempted to re-enter the corporate world, but his reputation had preceded him, a digital scarlet letter that prevented him from finding any significant role. He faded into obscurity, a man whose ambition had far outstripped his capacity, a cautionary footnote in the annals of Innovatech. Silas's personal life, which had been so singularly dedicated to Innovatech for so long, found a new balance. With the company's future secure and his position acknowledged and respected, he had the freedom to reclaim aspects of himself he had long neglected. He pursued old hobbies, like restoring antique timepieces, finding a meditative rhythm in the intricate gears, and cultivated new interests, such as long-distance running, finding clarity and perspective on long, solitary trails. He reconnected with the world beyond circuit boards and code, enjoying quiet dinners with old friends and exploring distant landscapes he had only dreamed of. The quiet satisfaction of his work was now complemented by a newfound personal serenity, a peace that only comes from a life lived with integrity and profound purpose. The true moral of Silas's story, however, extends far beyond the confines of Innovatech's boardrooms. It is a profound lesson for anyone who seeks to navigate the complexities of life, particularly in an era obsessed with the new and the disruptive. Value is not always loud, it does not always announce itself with a flourish or a slick presentation. Sometimes, the most indispensable contributions are those meticulously built in the quiet solitude, the unseen foundations, the diligent foresight that anticipates the storm long before the first cloud appears. Never underestimate the quiet strength of experience, the wisdom forged over years of dedication, or the profound power of preparation. True worth, like a deep and sturdy root system, may not always be visible on the surface, but it is precisely what allows everything else to flourish and endure. When others are focused on chasing the fleeting shimmer of novelty, remember that true resilience lies in understanding and honoring the invaluable, often unseen, groundwork that underpins every lasting success. If you enjoyed Silas's journey and the quiet power of foresight, remember to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications for more stories like this. We delve into tales of resilience, strategy, and the often unseen forces that shape our world. What do you think was Dax Thorne's biggest mistake? And what's one unseen value that you believe is often overlooked in today's fast-paced world? Share your thoughts in the comments below, we love hearing from you.